Most people wake up every single day feeling like something is missing. They work hard, they try their best, and yet they keep ending up in the same place. Same struggles, same frustration, same distance from the life they actually want. And the painful truth is that the problem is never the circumstances. It is never the lack of opportunity or the absence of talent. The problem is always the mind running the show behind the scenes. Your mind is either your greatest weapon or your worst enemy. And right now, for most people, it is the latter, untrained, undirected, running on old fears, borrowed beliefs, and habits that were never consciously chosen. But here is what changes everything. The mind can be trained, and a trained mind does not just survive hard circumstances, it wins through them. In this book, you are going to learn exactly how to do that, how to destroy the thinking that has been holding you back, how to build daily habits that rewire your brain for success, how to develop the kind of discipline that works even when motivation is completely gone, and how to become the person your potential has always been waiting for you to become. This is not theory. Every single chapter is a practical tool you can use, starting today. Your mind is ready to be trained. The only question is whether you are ready to begin. Chapter 1. Decide today that your mind is worth training. There is a moment in every person's life when they look in the mirror and feel something is missing. Not missing in the way you lose your keys or forget a name, missing in a deeper way. A feeling that you are capable of more, but somehow you keep falling short. You work hard, but do not move forward. You try to change, but fall back into the same patterns. You wake up every morning with good intentions, but by night you are disappointed in yourself again. That feeling is not a sign that you are broken. That feeling is a sign that your mind has never been properly trained. Your mind is the most powerful tool you will ever own. It is more valuable than any bank account, any degree, any connection, or any opportunity. Everything you have ever achieved came from your mind first. Every decision you have made, every word you have spoken, every action you have taken started as a thought. Your mind is the engine behind your entire life. And yet most people go through their entire lives never once stopping to train it. Think about how much time and money people invest in their physical appearance. They go to the gym, they eat carefully, they buy new clothes, they work on how they look to the world. But the mind, the thing that actually controls whether they succeed or fail, whether they are happy or miserable, whether they grow or stay stuck, gets almost no attention at all. People feed their body 3 times a day but starve their mind for years and then wonder why life feels empty. This is not your fault. Nobody taught you that your mind needs training. School taught you math and history, but never taught you how to think powerfully. Your parents did their best, but they too were never taught. Society is designed to keep you consuming, reacting, and staying distracted, not thinking deeply and growing intentionally. So here you are, running on a mind that has been shaped by random events, other people's opinions, past failures, old fears, and unconscious habits. No wonder life feels like a struggle. But today, something changes. Today you make a decision, not a wish, not a hope. A real, firm, unshakable decision. You decide that your mind is worth training. You decide that from this moment forward, you will take your mental development as seriously as anything else in your life. This one decision, made fully and honestly, has the power to change everything that comes after it. A decision is not the same as a thought. You have had thousands of thoughts about changing. You have thought about waking up earlier, working harder, being more disciplined, stopping bad habits. Thoughts come and go like clouds. A decision is different. A decision cuts through the noise and lands somewhere deep inside you. When you truly decide something, your behavior starts to shift even before you know what steps to take. The decision itself is the first act of training your mind. So, ask yourself right now, honestly and without judgment, have you ever fully decided to train your mind, not dabbled in a self-help book here and there, not listened to a motivational video when you were feeling low, but actually decided with full seriousness that you are going to do the work of reshaping how you think, how you respond, how you focus, and how you grow every single day? If the answer is no, then that is the most important thing you can understand from this chapter. The work begins with the decision. Now here is what most people get wrong about mindset work. They think it is about positivity. They think training your mind means repeating affirmations in the mirror, thinking happy thoughts, and pretending problems do not exist. That is not what this book is about. Training your mind is hard work. It is honest work. It means looking at the thoughts that are holding you back and refusing to let them run your life anymore. It means sitting with discomfort instead of running from it. It means choosing discipline over comfort, day after day, even when it is hard and even when nobody is watching. The Stoic philosophers understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men who ever lived, spent every single morning writing in his journal, not to journal about his feelings, but to train his mind. He reminded himself of his values. He prepared for challenges. He corrected his thinking. He was a Roman emperor, and yet he treated mental discipline as his most important daily practice, not because life was easy for him, because it was not. He faced wars, betrayal, illness, and loss. He trained his mind so that no matter what happened around him, what happened inside him remained strong. That is what mental training gives you, not a perfect life, a stronger inner world that can handle whatever life throws at you. Here is something powerful to understand. Your mind right now is already trained, just not by you. It has been trained by your environment. It has been trained by the criticism you heard growing up, by the failures that made you afraid to try again, by the comparisons you made with others that made you feel small, by the media that told you what to want and who to be, by the habits you formed without thinking. Your mind has been in training your entire life. The only question is who has been doing the training. When you realize this, something shifts. You stop seeing yourself as someone who lacks willpower or discipline. You start seeing yourself as someone who has simply been running on programming that was installed without your permission. And programming can be changed. That is the entire point. That is the entire promise of this book. You can take back the controls, but you have to want to. That is the part nobody can do for you. There is a man named David Goggins who grew up in poverty, abuse, and racial hatred. He was overweight, uneducated, and working a night job spraying cockroaches for a living. By every external measure, his future looked limited, but something inside him cracked open one day. He made a decision, not a comfortable decision, a brutal, honest, terrifying decision that he was going to become the hardest man on earth. He trained his mind through physical suffering, through doing the things he feared most, through refusing every excuse his own mind gave him. He went on to become a Navy SEAL, an ultra-marathon runner, and one of the most mentally tough human beings alive. He did not have better circumstances than you. He made a better decision than most people are willing to make. You do not have to become David Goggins, but you need to understand the principle his life demonstrates. The mind responds to training. It is not fixed. It is not fate. It is a muscle, and like every muscle, it grows stronger when you work it. So what does it mean practically to start training your mind today? It starts with awareness. You cannot change what you do not see. For the next 7 days, pay attention to your thoughts the way a scientist observes an experiment. When something goes wrong, what does your mind say? When you face a challenge, does your mind immediately look for reasons why it will not work? When you think about your goals, does fear show up louder than belief? When you make a mistake, do you punish yourself for hours, or do you learn and move on? Do not judge what you notice, just notice it. That awareness alone is the beginning of training. The second practical step is to start feeding your mind intentionally. What you consume daily shapes your thinking. If you spend hours in negative news, gossip, and mindless entertainment, your mind will reflect that. Start reading books that challenge and expand how you see the world. Start listening to people who have built the kind of life and character you admire. Start protecting your mind from content that leaves you feeling anxious, small, or angry. You would not pour dirt into a high-performance engine. Do not pour mental garbage into the most powerful tool you own. The third step is to start talking to yourself differently. The voice inside your head is speaking to you constantly. Research shows that people say thousands of words to themselves every single day, and for most people, the majority of those words are negative, fearful, or limiting. Begin to notice when your self-talk is working against you. When you catch yourself saying you cannot do something, pause and ask whether that is actually true or whether that is just a habit of thought. You do not need to force fake positivity. Just stop allowing negative self-talk to go unchallenged. Start questioning it. Start replacing it slowly with something more honest and more empowering. The fourth step is to write down what you want your mind to become, not what you want to have, not what you want to achieve. What kind of thinker do you want to be? Do you want to be someone who stays calm under pressure? Write that down. Do you want to be someone who takes action despite fear? Write that down. Do you want to be someone who sees opportunity in difficulty? Write that down. Clarity on who you want to become mentally gives your training a direction. Without direction, effort becomes scattered, and the mind goes back to its old defaults. None of these steps are complicated, but simple does not mean easy. The hard part is not understanding what to do. The hard part is doing it when you do not feel like it, when you are tired, when life is messy, when old habits pull at you. That is exactly when the training matters most. That is exactly when you find out whether your decision was real. And here is the thing about real decisions. They do not need to be renewed every day. You do not wake up each morning and decide again whether to breathe. You breathe because that is what you are. When you truly decide that training your mind is who you are now, the effort starts to feel less like a burden and more like an identity. You are not someone trying to be disciplined. You are a disciplined person. You are not someone trying to think better. You are someone who trains their mind every day, because that is simply what you do. This is where lasting change lives, not in the big dramatic moments of motivation. In the quiet, daily commitment to doing the work, even when no one is watching, even when progress feels slow, even when the old voice inside tells you to stop. You picked up this book because something inside you knows there is more available to you. That feeling is not an accident. That feeling is your potential pressing against the ceiling of your current thinking. The only thing standing between where you are and where you are capable of going is the mind you are using to get there. Train it. Starting today, not Monday, not after the next problem passes, not when life calms down. Today. Because the person who waits for the perfect moment to begin their growth is the same person who looks back 10 years from now still waiting. You deserve better than a life lived on default settings. Your mind deserves the same dedication you give to everything else that matters to you. And the people in your life, the ones who depend on you, who love you, who need you to show up fully, they deserve a version of you that has done the work. Decide now. Commit fully. Begin today. The rest of this book will show you exactly how. Chapter 2. Destroy the limiting beliefs holding you back daily. There is a voice inside your head that has been lying to you for years. It speaks quietly but consistently. It shows up the moment you consider something new, something bold, something that requires you to grow. It says you are not smart enough. It says people like you do not succeed at things like that. It says you have tried before and failed, so why bother trying again? It says the world is unfair and the odds are against you. It sounds like your own voice, which is exactly why you believe it, without question. But that voice is not the truth. That voice is a belief, and beliefs can be destroyed. A limiting belief is any thought you hold about yourself or the world that shrinks what you allow yourself to pursue. It is not a fact. It feels like a fact because you have repeated it so many times inside your mind that it has become automatic. But repetition does not create truth. It only creates familiarity. You are familiar with the story that you are not good enough, not ready enough, not capable enough. You have told it so many times that you stopped questioning it. And when you stop questioning a belief, you start living inside it like it is a wall you cannot cross. Here is what you must understand about where limiting beliefs come from. They were not born inside you. You were not brought into this world believing you were inadequate. Watch any small child and you will see a human being with zero hesitation. They fall while learning to walk and they get back up without a second thought. They try, they fail, they try again, and they do not attach a story to the failure. They do not decide that falling means they are not a walking type of person, but somewhere along the way that changes. A teacher makes a cutting remark. A parent, with the best of intentions, tells you to be realistic. A group of peers laughs at your attempt. You experience a painful failure at a moment when you were not yet strong enough to process it with wisdom. And your mind, trying to protect you from future pain, builds a wall. That wall is a limiting belief. The mind's job is to keep you safe. Limiting beliefs are a form of protection that eventually becomes a prison. The same mental mechanism that once shielded you from embarrassment is now stopping you from applying for the job, starting the business, having the honest conversation, or committing fully to your goals. What protected you as a child is limiting you as an adult, and you have the power to dismantle it. The first thing you need to do is identify the specific beliefs that are running your life without your permission. Most people walk around carrying beliefs they have never once examined. They feel the resistance when they move towards something meaningful, but they label it as fear, laziness, or bad luck, rather than tracing it back to its root. So take a pen and a piece of paper and write down the areas of your life where you feel most stuck. Your finances, your relationships, your career, your health, your confidence. Now for each area, write down the first thought that comes when you imagine yourself fully succeeding in that area. Not what you hope for. The automatic thought. The one that says, but. That thought is your limiting belief showing itself. You might write something like, I would love to build a successful business, but people from my background never really make it to that level. Or, I want deep, meaningful relationships, but I have always been someone who pushes people away. Or, I want to be financially free, but I have never been good with money, and I probably never will be. Write those beliefs down exactly as they sound inside your head. Do not soften them. Do not dress them up. See them for what they are. That act of writing them down and reading them back is the beginning of their destruction, because you have now separated yourself from the belief. You are no longer inside it looking out. You are outside it looking in. Now comes the most important question you will ever ask yourself about a limiting belief. You look at what you have written and you ask simply, is this actually true? Not, does it feel true? Not, have I experienced evidence that supports it, but is it objectively, universally, without exception true? Is it true that people from your background never succeed? Because somewhere in the world right now, there is a person who grew up exactly where you grew up, faced exactly what you faced, and built something extraordinary? Is it true that you have always pushed people away? Because you can probably think of at least one relationship in your life where you showed up with care and consistency. The belief cannot be universally true if even one exception exists, and exceptions always exist. This is not about dismissing real challenges. Your background may have created real obstacles. Your past experiences may have genuinely hurt you. Those things are true, and they deserve acknowledgement. But an obstacle and a permanent ceiling are two completely different things. An obstacle is something in your path. A ceiling is something you have accepted as the end of your road. Limiting beliefs turn obstacles into ceilings. Your job is to refuse that transformation. You do not ignore the obstacle. You refuse to let it become a permanent story about who you are and what you are capable of achieving. The next step after identifying and questioning a belief is to actively replace it. Nature does not allow a vacuum. When you remove a thought that has been occupying mental space for years, something will fill that space. If you do not choose what fills it, the old belief will return because it is familiar, and the mind always defaults to what is familiar. So you need to deliberately install a new belief, not a fantasy, not empty positive thinking, but a belief that is honest, realistic, and expansive rather than shrinking. If your old belief was that people like you do not build successful businesses, your new belief does not need to be that you are guaranteed to become a millionaire. That would not feel believable, and your mind will reject it immediately. Your new belief could simply be that your background does not determine your outcome, and that with the right skills, consistency, and support, you are fully capable of building something significant. That is honest. That is supported by real evidence in the world. And it opens a door that the old belief had sealed shut. Write the new belief down. Say it out loud. Put it somewhere you will see it every morning. Your mind needs repetition to make a belief feel automatic, which means you need to repeat the new belief with the same frequency that the old one was running. You spent years reinforcing the limiting belief without even trying. Now you spend deliberate time reinforcing the new one. This is not fake. This is neuroscience. Your brain forms stronger neural pathways around thoughts that are repeated consistently. You are literally rewiring your brain every time you return to the new belief, and every time you catch the old one and refuse to follow it. There is another dimension to destroying limiting beliefs that most people overlook. The people you spend time with are constantly either reinforcing or dismantling your beliefs about what is possible. If everyone around you operates from the belief that life is hard, that success is for other people, that ambition leads to disappointment, that voice you hear in your head has probably borrowed heavily from those conversations. The beliefs of your environment become your beliefs over time without you realizing it. This is not about judging the people in your life or abandoning everyone who has not yet started their own growth journey, but it is about being honest about whose voice is living inside your head and whether that voice is helping you expand or helping you stay small. Seek out stories of people who had every reason to believe they were limited and chose not to accept that story. Read about them. Study their thinking. Let their example challenge the narrative your limiting beliefs have been writing for you. When you see repeatedly that human beings rise above circumstances that should have stopped them, it becomes harder and harder to justify the belief that your particular circumstances are an exception. Evidence is the enemy of a limiting belief. Fill your mind with evidence that contradicts what has been holding you back. The most dangerous version of a limiting belief is the one that disguises itself as wisdom. It tells you that you are just being realistic. It tells you that you are protecting yourself from disappointment. It tells you that the people who believe in themselves too much are the ones who get hurt the most. This version of a limiting belief wears the costume of maturity and caution, which makes it the hardest to challenge. But realistic thinking and limiting thinking are not the same thing. Realistic thinking acknowledges difficulty and plans for it. Limiting thinking uses difficulty as a reason to never begin. One moves you forward carefully, the other keeps you standing still permanently. You were built for more than standing still. The discomfort you feel when you imagine crossing the boundaries of your current beliefs is not a warning sign to retreat. It is a signal that growth is waiting on the other side. Every person who has ever created a life they are proud of had to walk directly through that discomfort. They did not feel ready, they did not feel certain. They felt afraid, and they moved anyway, because they had made a choice that their beliefs about themselves would no longer be allowed to make decisions on their behalf. That is the choice in front of you now, not a choice between easy and hard, a choice between a smaller life defined by old stories and a larger life built by honest, courageous daily action. The beliefs that have been holding you back did not arrive overnight, and they will not disappear overnight. But every single day that you question them, replace them, and act against them is a day they lose a little more power over you. Start today. Pick one belief that has been limiting you the longest. Question it honestly. Replace it deliberately. Act against it immediately, even in a small way. That small act of defiance against your own limiting belief is the most powerful thing you will do today. And tomorrow you do it again, and the day after that. Until one day you look back and realize the wall that felt permanent was never a wall at all. It was just a thought you had not yet decided to challenge. Chapter 3. Build a morning routine that programs your mind. The first hour of your morning is not just the start of your day. It is the foundation upon which every thought, every decision, and every action of that day will be built. What you do in those early minutes sets the tone for everything that follows. And yet most people hand that hour over without a second thought. The alarm goes off, and within seconds they are reaching for their phone, scrolling through news, checking messages, consuming other people's thoughts and problems before they have even had a single thought of their own. They start the day in reaction mode, and they spend the rest of the day trying to catch up with themselves. What you do first thing in the morning matters more than almost anything else in your life, not because of some mystical reason, but because of how your brain actually works. When you wake up from sleep, your brain moves from a deeply relaxed state into a more conscious and active state. During this transition, your mind is highly impressionable. It is open, receptive, and more influenced by input than at almost any other time of day. Whatever you feed it in this window will shape the lens through which you see everything that follows. Feed it anxiety and comparison from social media, and you will spend the day feeling behind. Feed it silence, intention, and purpose, and you will move through the day from a place of strength. A morning routine is not a luxury reserved for successful people. It is one of the primary reasons they became successful in the first place. When you study the lives of people who have built extraordinary things, one pattern appears again and again. They protect their mornings. They do not let the world interrupt them before they have first shown up for themselves. They use those early hours to think, to prepare, to align themselves mentally with who they are working to become. The morning routine is how they program the mind before the world gets a chance to program it for them. Think of your mind like a computer that boots up fresh every morning. Before any programs run, before any files open, there is a brief window where the system is clean and ready to be configured. That is your morning. If you allow noise, distraction, and stress to be the first things that load into that system, your entire operating system for the day runs on those inputs. But if you intentionally choose what loads first, you configure the system to run on focus, clarity, and purpose. The morning routine is your daily configuration process. The most important thing to understand about building a morning routine is that it does not need to be complicated or perfectly long to be powerful. There is a damaging idea circulating that a proper morning routine requires waking up at 4 in the morning, meditating for an hour, running 10 kilometers, writing a novel, and reading 3 books before breakfast. That kind of thinking stops people before they even start. They look at the ideal version of a morning routine, and because they cannot do all of it perfectly, they do none of it at all. This is a trap. A 30-minute intentional morning will produce more results than a 3-hour chaotic one. Start with the first thing you do when you open your eyes. Before you reach for your phone, before you speak to anyone, before you let the outside world in, take 3 slow, deep breaths. This sounds almost too simple to be meaningful, but the act of conscious breathing the moment you wake up is a signal to your nervous system that you are in control. You are not reacting, you are choosing. That small act of choosing is how the morning routine begins, not with a task, with an intention. After those first breaths, sit up and drink a full glass of water. Your body has been without water for 7 or 8 hours. Your brain is roughly 75% water, and even mild dehydration affects your focus, your mood, and your ability to think clearly. Hydrating first thing is not just physical maintenance, it is mental preparation. You are giving your brain the basic resource it needs to function at its best for the hours ahead. Now comes the part that most people skip entirely, and it is the part that makes the biggest difference. Before you plan your day, before you check your tasks, before you think about what you need to accomplish, spend 5 to 10 minutes in complete silence. No music, no podcast, no phone. Just you and your own mind. Sit with yourself. Let thoughts come and go without chasing them. This is not meditation in the complicated formal sense. It is simply the practice of being present with yourself before the world demands your presence. Most people are so uncomfortable with silence that they fill every quiet moment with noise. But silence is where clarity lives. It is where your most honest thoughts surface. It is where you get to hear what you actually think, not what the world has been telling you to think. From that place of quiet, move into intention setting. Ask yourself one simple question. Who do you need to be today? Not, what do you need to do? Not, what problems do you need to solve? Who do you need to be? Do you need to be patient, focused, courageous, calm, generous? Identify the quality of person you want to show up as and hold that clearly in your mind. This is not goal setting, this is identity setting. When you define who you are being before you start doing, your actions naturally align with that identity throughout the day. You make decisions differently. You respond to challenges differently. You carry yourself differently. Writing is one of the most underused tools in morning routines. Taking even 5 minutes to write helps you externalize the thoughts that are circling inside your head and see them clearly on a page. You do not need to write beautifully or coherently. Write whatever is present for you, what you are feeling, what you are working through, what you are grateful for, what you want to focus on. The act of writing creates distance between you and your thoughts, which gives you perspective rather than being consumed by them. Many people discover through daily writing that the fears and anxieties that felt enormous inside their head look much smaller and more manageable when they see them written down. That shift in perspective at the start of the day changes everything that follows. Gratitude is not a soft or optional part of a morning routine. It is scientifically demonstrated to shift the brain from a threat-focused state to an abundance-focused state. When your brain is scanning for threats, it produces stress chemicals and narrows your perception. When your brain is in a state of gratitude, it produces different neurochemicals entirely, and your thinking becomes more creative, more open, and more resourceful. Write down 3 things you are genuinely grateful for each morning. Not the same 3 things every day in a mechanical way. Actually stop and feel grateful for something specific. The warmth of your bed. The fact that you woke up with your health intact. A person in your life who shows up for you. Something that happened yesterday that you appreciated. Let the feeling of gratitude actually land in your body before you move on. Physical movement in the morning is not optional if you are serious about mental performance. Your body and mind are not separate systems. They are one deeply interconnected system, and physical activity sends a direct signal to your brain that it is time to be alert, alive, and engaged. You do not need an intense workout. 20 minutes of movement, a brisk walk, stretching, light exercise, or anything that gets your blood moving is enough to fundamentally change the chemistry of your brain for the hours ahead. People who move their body in the morning consistently report better focus, better mood, and better decision-making throughout the day. That is not a coincidence. That is biology. Reading for even 15 minutes in the morning feeds your mind with perspective and wisdom before the day's noise has a chance to narrow your thinking. Choose books or material that challenge how you see the world or teach you something about the person you are working to become. Not the news, not social media. Actual books by people who have thought deeply about life, success, human nature, and growth. Over the course of a year, 15 minutes of morning reading adds up to roughly 20 books worth of knowledge absorbed before most people have even started their day. The compounding effect of that knowledge on your thinking is enormous. Now here is the resistance you will face. You will wake up some mornings exhausted. The routine will feel like a burden on those days. You will want to skip it and tell yourself you will do better tomorrow. This is the exact moment where the morning routine either becomes a real part of who you are or remains a nice idea you sometimes attempt. The value of a morning routine is not in doing it when you feel motivated. Motivation is unreliable and fleeting. The value is in doing it when you do not feel like it, because that is when it rewires the most. Each time you follow through on your routine, despite the resistance, you are building evidence that you are someone who keeps their commitments to themselves. And a person who keeps commitments to themselves is someone who can trust themselves. That self-trust becomes the foundation for everything else you want to build. Start with 15 minutes. If an hour feels impossible, wake up 15 minutes earlier than usual and use that time intentionally. Breathe, hydrate, sit in silence, set one intention. Write one paragraph. Feel genuine gratitude for one thing. Move your body for 5 minutes. That is it. 15 minutes of intention is infinitely more powerful than 2 hours of chaos. As the routine becomes natural, expand it gradually. Add one element at a time. Let it grow organically rather than trying to overhaul your entire morning overnight. The person who controls their morning controls their mind. The person who controls their mind controls their life. Every day that you build your morning intentionally is a day that belongs to you. Every day that you let the morning happen to you by default is a day that belongs to everything and everyone except you. Over weeks, months, and years, the difference between those two approaches becomes the difference between two completely different lives. You have the same 24 hours as everyone else. The question is not whether you have time for a morning routine. The question is whether you are willing to protect the hours that belong to you before the world claims them. Starting tomorrow morning, that answer needs to be yes. Chapter 4. Strengthen your focus by eliminating what drains you. There is a silent war happening inside your life every single day, and most people do not even know they are losing it. It is not a war fought with weapons or words. It is a war fought with attention. Every notification that pulls your eyes to a screen, every conversation that leaves you feeling hollow, every habit that consumes your hours without adding anything real to your life, Every environment that keeps your nervous system in a constant state of low-grade stress, all of it is stealing something from you that you can never get back. It is stealing your focus, and without focus, nothing meaningful gets built. Without focus, your potential sits untouched, while your days disappear into things that never mattered. Focus is not simply the ability to concentrate on a task. Focus is the ability to direct the full power of your mind toward what actually matters to you and hold it there long enough to produce real results. It is the difference between a scattered ray of light and a laser beam. The light exists in both cases, but only the laser has the power to cut through something solid. Your mind works exactly the same way. Scattered attention produces scattered results. Concentrated attention produces breakthroughs. Every person you admire who has built something remarkable did so not because they had more time than you, but because they learned to protect their focus with a seriousness that most people never apply to their own lives. The reason focus feels so difficult in the modern world is not because human beings are weak or lazy. It is because an entire industry worth trillions of dollars has been specifically engineered to fracture your attention and keep it fragmented. Every app on your phone has been designed by teams of the most intelligent engineers and psychologists on Earth with one primary goal: to capture your attention and hold it as long as possible. Every notification, every infinite scroll, every algorithm-driven feed has been calibrated to trigger your brain's reward system just enough to keep you coming back. You are not fighting your own weakness when you struggle to focus. You are fighting a machine that was built to defeat you. Understanding that is the first step to fighting back intelligently. The second step is to conduct an honest audit of everything in your daily life that drains your energy, your time, and your mental clarity without giving anything meaningful in return. Most people have never done this. They move through their days on autopilot, giving their attention to whatever demands it loudest, without ever asking whether that thing deserves what they are giving it. So take a full, honest look at a typical day in your life. How much time do you spend on your phone doing things that do not move your life forward? How many conversations do you have that leave you feeling worse than before they happened? How many commitments are you honoring out of guilt or obligation rather than genuine purpose? How many environments are you spending time in that create noise, stress, or negativity in your mind? Write all of it down. See the full picture clearly, because you cannot eliminate what you have not first identified. What you will find when you do this honestly is that a surprisingly large portion of your daily energy is going toward things that are either completely optional or actively harmful to your mental state. And the reason you have not eliminated them is not because you cannot. It is because familiarity creates comfort even when that familiar thing is hurting you. People hold on to draining habits, draining relationships, and draining environments because at least they are known. The unknown feels more threatening than the familiar drain. But that is the trap. You are choosing a guaranteed loss over an uncertain gain, and guaranteed losses compound over time into a life that feels perpetually exhausted and unfulfilled. Start with your phone, because for most people in this era, the phone is the single greatest thief of focused mental energy. The average person checks their phone over 100 times a day. Each check, even a brief one, costs your brain what researchers call a switching cost. Every time your attention moves from what you were doing to the phone and back again, your brain requires time to fully re-engage with the original task. Studies show this re-engagement can take up to 20 minutes after a single distraction, which means that a 2-minute phone check in the middle of focused work does not cost you 2 minutes. It costs you 22 minutes of peak cognitive performance. Multiply that across a day of constant interruptions, and you begin to understand why you feel busy but unproductive. You are not lacking effort. You are hemorrhaging focus. Turn off every non-essential notification on your phone right now. Not later, now. Every buzz, ping, and banner that is not genuinely urgent is a request from someone or something else to interrupt your most valuable mental resource. You do not need to know the moment someone likes your post. You do not need to be notified every time an app wants your attention. These interruptions have been designed to feel urgent. They are not. Reclaim that decision. Put your phone in a different room when you are doing your most important work. Use it intentionally at specific times you choose, rather than letting it summon you hundreds of times a day without your permission. Beyond the phone, look at the content you consume regularly. There is a direct relationship between what you consistently consume and the quality of your thoughts. If your daily consumption is dominated by negative news cycles, outrage-driven social media, gossip, and low-quality entertainment, your mind will spend enormous energy processing the emotional residue of all that content. Fear, anger, comparison, and cynicism are cognitively expensive states to maintain. They consume mental bandwidth that could otherwise be directed toward creative thinking, problem-solving, and forward movement. This is not about being ignorant of the world. It is about being intentional about what you allow to live inside your head, rent-free. Create clear boundaries around your content consumption. Designate specific times for checking news and social media rather than allowing them to seep into every available moment. Ask yourself honestly, after consuming any piece of content, whether it made you more capable, more informed in a useful way, or more equipped to handle your life. If the consistent answer is no, that content is a drain and it deserves to be cut or drastically reduced from your daily life. Now, turn your attention to the people in your life, because human interaction is one of the most significant energy variables you will encounter. Some people leave you feeling energized, clear, and inspired after spending time with them. Others leave you feeling depleted, confused, anxious, or smaller than before the conversation happened. Both of these effects are real, and both of them affect your capacity for focus. When you spend regular time with people who drain your energy, you carry the residue of those interactions into every other area of your life. You sit down to do important work, and your mind is still processing the anxiety or negativity from a conversation that happened 2 hours ago. That is not a coincidence. That is the cost of unmanaged social energy. You do not need to be cruel or dramatic about managing which relationships receive your time and energy, but you do need to be honest. You are allowed to see less of people who consistently leave you feeling worse. You are allowed to keep conversations shorter. You are allowed to decline invitations to environments that you know from experience will cost you more than they give. Protecting your energy from relationships that drain it is not selfishness. It is responsible stewardship of the most important resource you bring to everything you care about. There is also an internal dimension to what drains your focus that exists entirely within your own mind. Unresolved worry, unfinished decisions, and unaddressed emotional tension consume cognitive resources constantly, even when you are not consciously thinking about them. Psychologists refer to this as the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency of the brain to keep unfinished business circling in the background of your thoughts. Every decision you have been avoiding, every difficult conversation you keep postponing, every commitment you made to yourself and have not honored is running as a background program in your mind and consuming processing power that you need for the work that actually matters. The most effective way to reclaim that mental energy is to close those open loops. Make the decision you have been avoiding. Have the conversation you have been postponing. Follow through on the commitment you made to yourself, or consciously release it. Each closed loop frees up mental space, and what you get back is clarity. Clutter in your physical environment also drains focus in ways that are easy to underestimate. A disorganized desk, a chaotic room, a cluttered workspace all create low-level visual noise that your brain has to process continuously. Research on environmental psychology consistently shows that people think more clearly, work more effectively, and feel calmer in organized environments. Spend 20 minutes organizing your primary workspace. Remove everything from your immediate view that is not relevant to the work you are doing. This is not about perfectionism or aesthetics. It is about removing unnecessary cognitive load from your environment so your mind can direct its full power toward what you are actually trying to accomplish. Single tasking is a skill that has become almost revolutionary in an era that praises multitasking. The brain cannot actually perform two cognitively demanding tasks simultaneously. What it does instead is switch rapidly between tasks, and every switch costs energy and degrades performance on both tasks. When you try to answer messages while working on something important, you are not doing two things at once. You are doing two things badly. Choose one thing. Give it your complete and undivided attention for a defined period of time, then move to the next thing. This approach feels uncomfortable at first because the habit of fragmented attention runs deep, but the results it produces are incomparable. An hour of genuine single-tasked focus produces more meaningful output than 4 hours of distracted multitasking. Build focused work blocks into your day deliberately. Start with 25 minutes of uninterrupted work on your most important task. No phone, no email, no conversations, just you and the work. When the time ends, take a 5-minute break, then do it again. This approach, sometimes called time blocking, works because it aligns with the natural rhythm of human attention rather than fighting against it. Your brain can sustain deep focus in bounded intervals far more effectively than in open-ended marathon sessions. Over time, as your focus muscle strengthens, you can extend these blocks. But begin where you are, not where you wish you were. Everything you want to build in your life requires sustained focus to build it. The relationship, the business, the skill, the physical health, the financial freedom, none of it materializes from scattered effort and divided attention. They are all built brick by brick through focused, consistent, undistracted action applied over time. Every time you choose to protect your focus, you are choosing your future over your comfort. Every time you eliminate something that drains you, you are reclaiming energy that belongs to your most important work. And every day that you direct your full attention toward what truly matters, you are pulling ahead in a world where most people are permanently distracted and wondering why they never seem to arrive at the life they imagined for themselves. Your focus is your power. Guard it like it is the most valuable thing you own, because it is. Chapter 5. Embrace failure as the greatest teacher you have. Nobody sits down as a child and decides that failure will define them. That relationship with failure is learned. It is taught quietly through embarrassment, through harsh reactions from people whose opinions mattered, through a school system that grades mistakes as evidence of inadequacy rather than signals of learning in progress. By the time most people reach adulthood, they have developed a deeply uncomfortable relationship with failure. They avoid it at almost any cost. They stay inside safe boundaries. They choose the path most likely to succeed, even when that path leads somewhere they do not actually want to go. They shrink their ambitions to fit the size of what they feel certain they can achieve. And in doing so, they trade the life they were capable of living for the life that felt safest to attempt. This is one of the most expensive decisions a human being can make, and most people make it without ever realizing they made it at all. Failure is not the opposite of success. This is perhaps the most important reframe in this entire book. Failure is not a detour away from success. It is the actual road that success is built on. Every person who has ever created something worth admiring did so by failing repeatedly, learning precisely, and continuing persistently. The failure was not incidental to their achievement. It was instrumental to it. Without the failures, they would not have developed the specific knowledge, the refined skill, the hardened resilience, or the deep self-understanding that made their eventual success possible. You cannot arrive at mastery without first spending significant time being bad at something and being willing to stay in that uncomfortable place long enough to get better. Think about how a child learns to walk. They stand up and fall. They stand up and fall again. They fall dozens of times, perhaps hundreds of times across days and weeks of attempting. Nobody watching a toddler fall looks at the child with disappointment and says, "Perhaps walking is simply not for you." Nobody interprets the falling as evidence of a fundamental flaw in the child's character. The falling is understood as an essential part of the learning process. The falling is how the child's nervous system receives feedback, makes micro-adjustments, and gradually builds the neural connections required for balance. The falling is the teaching. But somewhere between childhood and adulthood, we stop understanding falling this way. We start treating it as evidence of inadequacy rather than information for improvement. Reclaiming a child's relationship with failure, not the recklessness but the fearlessness, is one of the most transformative things you can do for your life. It does not mean you stop caring about outcomes. It means you stop allowing the fear of a bad outcome to prevent you from attempting at all. It means you change the question from "what if I fail" to "what will I learn if this does not go the way I planned?" That single shift in the question you ask changes your entire orientation toward action. Risk stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like information gathering. Every significant failure in your life, if you are honest and willing to examine it carefully, contains a precise lesson that you could not have received any other way. The business that collapsed taught you something about your decision-making, your market understanding, or your execution that no book could have taught you as effectively. The relationship that ended painfully taught you something about your own needs, your patterns, or your communication that only that experience could have revealed. The health setback taught you something about how you had been treating your body that years of good intentions had failed to change. Failure teaches through experience, and experience creates a depth of understanding that is simply not available through any other means. The problem is that most people do not mind their failures for the lessons they contain. When something goes wrong, the instinct is to distance yourself from it as quickly as possible. The emotional pain of failure is real, and the natural response is to move away from pain. But moving away from the failure without first extracting its lesson means you carry the cost of that failure without receiving its benefit. You pay the price of the tuition, but you never attend the class. And because the lesson was not learned, life will present the same examination again in a different form until you finally sit still long enough to understand what it is trying to teach you. After any significant failure, before you move forward, give yourself a specific window of honest reflection, not self-punishment, not rumination, reflection. There is a critical difference between these three things. Self-punishment is emotionally painful and produces nothing useful. Rumination is circular thinking that replays what happened without moving toward understanding. Reflection is the deliberate, structured examination of what occurred, what factors contributed to it, what you would do differently with the knowledge you now have, and what this experience reveals about an area where you need to grow. Ask those questions honestly and write the answers down. The act of writing forces clarity and prevents the comfortable vagueness that allows lessons to slip by unlearned. One of the most common and destructive responses to failure is the decision to permanently lower your expectations of yourself. People experience a significant setback, And rather than adjusting their approach, they adjust their ambition. They decide that the failure was evidence that they were aiming too high, and they bring their goals down to a level that feels safer. This feels like wisdom in the moment. It feels like a mature acceptance of your limitations. But in most cases, it is simply fear wearing the costume of pragmatism. Lowering your aim because you failed once is like deciding never to drive again after your first car accident. The accident contained information about how to drive more carefully. It was not evidence that driving is beyond your capability. Adjust your strategy, refine your approach, develop the skills that the failure revealed you were lacking. But do not adjust your belief in what you are ultimately capable of achieving based on a single failure or even a series of failures. The trajectory of any meaningful pursuit is never a straight upward line. It is a jagged, irregular, often disheartening path that only looks clean and inevitable when you view it from the outside after someone has already succeeded. From the inside, during the process, it feels like failure after failure, interrupted by occasional progress. That is not an exception. That is the universal experience of anyone building something real. There is a concept in Japanese culture called kintsugi, which refers to the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. Rather than hiding the cracks or discarding the broken piece, the artist fills the breaks with gold lacquer, making the history of damage visible and treating it as something that adds beauty and value to the object rather than diminishing it. The repaired piece is considered more beautiful and more valuable than it was before it broke. This is a powerful way to understand what failure does to a person who responds to it with learning rather than defeat. The cracks in your experience, the places where things broke and had to be rebuilt, are not shameful marks on your story. They are the places where your gold is. They are the source of your most hard-won wisdom, your most genuine empathy, your most unshakable resilience. The people who are most capable of helping others are almost never the ones who experienced a smooth and comfortable path. They are the ones who fell apart and rebuilt themselves. They are the ones who lost what they thought they needed and discovered what they actually were. They are the ones whose failures cracked them open wide enough for real depth and real wisdom to grow inside them. Your failures are not the parts of your story you should hide. They are often the most powerful parts of your story because they are the parts that are most honest, most human, and most instructive to others who are walking a similar road. Fear of failure also has a specific cost that often goes unexamined. When you make decisions primarily based on avoiding failure rather than pursuing what genuinely matters to you, you end up living a life that belongs to your fears rather than your values. You take the job that feels secure rather than the path that feels meaningful. You stay in situations that are comfortable rather than pursuing ones that are aligned. You say yes to things that protect your safety and no to things that would require courage. Over years, this accumulates into a life that looks fine from the outside, but feels hollow from the inside. A life lived in avoidance of failure is a life lived in avoidance of genuine engagement with what you actually care about. The antidote is not recklessness. It is not throwing caution away and making impulsive decisions without thought. The antidote is developing what psychologists call a growth mindset, the genuine belief that your abilities, your intelligence, and your character are not fixed qualities you were born with, but dynamic capacities that develop through effort, challenge, and yes, through failure. When you operate from a growth mindset, failure stops being a verdict on who you are and becomes information about where you currently are in the process of becoming who you are capable of being. That shift changes everything because it removes the existential threat from failure. It is no longer evidence of your inadequacy. It is simply feedback on your current performance. Practice failing smaller and more frequently on purpose. Attempt things that are genuinely outside your current comfort zone, things where failure is a real possibility, and do it in lower stakes situations so that you build your tolerance for the discomfort of not succeeding. Take the class where you are a beginner. Attempt the creative project you have been putting off because you were not sure it would be good enough. Have the difficult conversation you have been avoiding. Apply for the opportunity that feels like a stretch. Each small deliberate step into the territory of possible failure expands your tolerance for risk and builds the evidence inside yourself that failure does not destroy you. It informs you. It develops you. It ultimately equips you. The most important relationship you will ever have with failure is the one happening right now, in this moment, as you read these words. Because right now you have the opportunity to decide how you will interpret every future failure before it even arrives. You can decide in advance that failure will not be allowed to end your story. You can decide that every time something does not go as planned, you will ask what this is teaching you before you ask why this happened to you. You can decide that the gap between where you are and where you want to be is not a source of shame, but a source of direction. That gap is simply the distance your growth needs to cover. And failure is the fastest, most efficient, most honest vehicle for covering it. Stop waiting until you are certain you will succeed before you attempt something that matters to you. Certainty is a comfort that growth almost never offers in advance. The courage is in moving forward without it. The wisdom is in knowing that every stumble along the way is building something inside you that no smooth path ever could. And the freedom is in finally releasing the exhausting weight of trying to protect yourself from an experience that was never your enemy to begin with. Failure was always your teacher. You just needed to stop running from the classroom. Chapter 6. Rewire your thinking through consistent daily mindset work. Your thinking is not fixed. This is the single most liberating truth you will encounter on any journey of personal growth, and it is also the most underestimated. Most people walk through their entire lives operating from the assumption that the way they think is simply the way they are, that their tendency toward worry is just their personality, that their inability to stay positive under pressure is just how they are wired, that their pattern of self-doubt or procrastination or negative self-talk is a permanent feature of who they are, rather than a habit of thought that developed over time and can be changed through deliberate, consistent effort. This assumption is not just wrong. It is one of the most limiting ideas a human being can carry because it removes the possibility of genuine transformation before the work even begins. The science behind this is not abstract or theoretical. Neuroscience has demonstrated through decades of rigorous research that the human brain retains the ability to form new neural connections, strengthen existing ones, and weaken the pathways associated with old patterns throughout the entire course of a human life. This capacity is called neuroplasticity, and it means that the brain you have today is not the brain you are permanently stuck with. Every thought you think, every pattern you practice, every response you choose either strengthens an existing neural pathway or begins to build a new one. Your brain is physically changing in response to how you use it. The question is not whether your brain is changing, it is always changing. The question is whether you are directing that change intentionally or allowing it to happen by default. When you think the same thoughts repeatedly, those thoughts become easier to think. The neural pathway associated with that thought pattern becomes more established, more automatic, more like the path of least resistance for your mind. This is why negative thinking feels so natural to people who have practiced it for years. It is not that negativity is their true nature. It is that they have, through repetition, built a mental highway toward negative interpretation, and the brain defaults to highways because highways require less effort than forging new trails. But here is the crucial insight. If repetition built the highway, repetition can also build a new one. The old pathway does not disappear immediately, but it weakens through disuse, while the new pathway strengthens through practice. Over time, the new way of thinking becomes the natural default. That is not wishful thinking. That is how the brain actually works. Rewiring your thinking is not a one-time event. It is a daily practice, and the word daily is not negotiable. People understand that physical fitness requires consistent training. Nobody expects to do one workout and be permanently strong. Nobody goes to the gym twice and considers their fitness journey complete. But those same people often approach mindset work with the expectation that reading one book, attending one seminar, or having one powerful insight should produce lasting change in how they think. When the change does not hold, they conclude that mindset work does not work, rather than recognizing that they stopped doing it before it had time to take root. The brain changes slowly, and the changes only become permanent through sustained repetition over weeks, months, and years. There are no shortcuts, and there is no substitute for showing up every day. The foundation of daily mindset work is self-observation. You cannot redirect thinking you are not aware of. Throughout a typical day, your mind produces thousands of thoughts, and the vast majority of them pass through your consciousness without any examination at all. You think them, you feel the emotional residue they create, and you act from that emotional state without ever tracing the action back to the thought that generated it. Becoming a deliberate observer of your own thinking is the foundational skill that makes all other mindset work possible. It means developing the habit of pausing, even briefly, and noticing what your mind is doing. Not judging it, not immediately trying to change it. Simply noticing it with the kind of neutral curiosity a scientist brings to observing data. When you notice a thought, ask whether it is serving you. This is a more useful question than asking whether the thought is positive or negative, because positivity for its own sake is not the goal. The goal is thinking that is accurate, constructive, and oriented toward what you want to create in your life. A thought can be honest about a difficult reality and still be serving you if it leads toward useful action. A thought can sound positive on the surface and still be undermining you if it is actually an avoidance mechanism in disguise. The question is not whether the thought feels good. The question is whether following this thought leads you toward the life you want or away from it. Journaling is one of the most powerful and accessible tools for daily mindset work, and it is consistently undervalued by people who have not experienced its effects firsthand. Writing your thoughts down does something that simply thinking about them cannot do. It creates an external record that you can examine from a perspective of distance. When a thought is inside your head, it feels enormous, certain, and real. When you write it down and read it back, you often discover that it is smaller, more questionable, and more worth challenging than it felt from the inside. Journaling also creates a record of your thinking over time, which allows you to identify recurring patterns that you would never notice in the moment. After 2 weeks of honest daily journaling, most people can identify 3 or 4 specific thought patterns that are running on repeat and generating predictable emotional outcomes in their daily experience. Write without filtering. Write without trying to sound wise or put together. Write the actual thoughts, including the ugly ones, the fearful ones, the petty ones, the confused ones. The journal is not a performance. It is a laboratory. The rawer and more honest your writing, the more useful the data you are collecting about how your mind actually operates versus how you wish it operated. That honest data is the starting point for real change. Alongside journaling, the deliberate practice of reframing is one of the most practically powerful mindset tools available to you. Reframing is not about denying reality or pretending problems do not exist. It is the disciplined practice of examining the interpretation you have placed on an event and asking whether a different interpretation is equally or more valid. Events themselves are neutral. What creates your emotional experience is the meaning you assign to the event, and meaning is not objective. It is constructed by your mind based on your beliefs, your past experiences, and your habitual patterns of interpretation. When something goes wrong and your mind immediately generates an interpretation, pause before accepting that interpretation as fact. Ask whether there is another way to see this situation. Ask what a person you deeply respect would think if they encountered this same event. Ask what the most useful interpretation of this situation would be, not the most comfortable one, but the most useful one. The most useful interpretation is the one that most accurately reflects reality while also pointing toward constructive action. Over time, the practice of reframing restructures how your mind processes events at an automatic level. You begin to generate more useful interpretations spontaneously because you have practiced generating them deliberately for long enough that they have become your default approach. Visualization is another daily mindset practice that is frequently dismissed as impractical by people who have never genuinely applied it with discipline and consistency. The brain does not make a complete distinction between a vividly imagined experience and an actual one in terms of the neural activity it generates. When you vividly imagine yourself performing an action, the same neural circuits activate as when you physically perform it. Athletes have known this for decades, and sports psychology research consistently confirms that mental rehearsal produces measurable improvements in physical performance. The same principle applies to any area of life where performance and mindset are connected, which is every area of life. Each morning, spend 5 minutes vividly imagining the version of yourself you are working to become. Do not imagine the destination as a distant fantasy. Imagine yourself today, in the specific situations you will face today, responding with the exact qualities you are developing. See yourself staying calm in the conversation that usually triggers your anxiety. See yourself following through on the commitment your old pattern would have abandoned. See yourself thinking clearly and acting decisively in the moment where you usually hesitate. Feel what it feels like to be that version of yourself. The more sensory and specific this visualization is, the more powerfully it programs your neural patterns for the actual moments when those situations arise. Affirmations have been both over-promoted and unfairly dismissed in popular culture. Used superficially, they produce nothing. Used correctly, they are a legitimate tool for neural reprogramming. The difference lies in whether the affirmation is believable and whether it is connected to a feeling. An affirmation that your mind immediately rejects as false does nothing useful. But an affirmation that is honest, specific, and slightly ahead of where you currently are, stated with genuine emotional engagement, begins to create new associations in your neural architecture. Rather than saying something your mind dismisses, choose statements that feel like genuine possibilities. Repeat them not mechanically, but with full attention and genuine feeling behind the words. The feeling is what activates the emotional centers of the brain, which is where real change in habitual thinking originates. Reading daily is mindset work in its most transferable form. When you read the thinking of people who have developed the mental qualities you want to build, you are essentially installing new cognitive software. You are encountering frameworks for interpreting the world that are different from your habitual ones, and giving your mind the option to adopt them. Over time, with enough exposure to a different way of thinking, that way of thinking begins to feel natural to you because it has been reinforced through repetition. Choose what you read deliberately. Choose books that challenge the specific mental patterns you are working to change and that model the specific thinking qualities you want to develop. A book a month of genuinely challenging material will shift your thinking in ways that most people around you will begin to notice within a year. The most important thing to understand about daily mindset work is that the days you do not feel like doing it are the most important days to do it anyway. The days when you feel low, discouraged, or convinced that nothing is working are the days when your old neural patterns are pulling hardest to reassert dominance. Those are exactly the days when showing up with your practice, however briefly and however imperfectly, sends the most powerful signal to your brain about which patterns are in charge. A 10-minute journaling session on your worst day is worth more than an hour on a day when everything feels easy. Because the 10 minutes on the hard day is a direct confrontation with the old pattern, and every confrontation you win shifts the balance a little further in your favor. You are not trying to think differently for a week or a month. You are trying to become a different kind of thinker permanently. That kind of change does not happen through intensity alone. It happens through consistency applied over time with patience and honest self-observation. The person you are working to become is not somewhere in the future waiting for you to arrive. They are being built day by day through the quality of thinking you practice right now, in this moment, and in every moment that follows where you choose to do the work. Show up for that work every single day. Not perfectly, not dramatically, just consistently. And trust that the brain you are training today is quietly, steadily, and irreversibly becoming the mind that will create the life you are reaching for. Chapter 7. Protect your energy from people who steal it. You have a finite amount of energy every single day. Not infinite, not renewable on demand. Finite. When it is gone, and everything that needed that energy, your goals, your relationships, your creative work, your physical health, your mental clarity, all of it suffers in direct proportion to how much of your energy was spent on things and people that gave nothing meaningful back. This is not a metaphor. Energy is a measurable biological and psychological resource that depletes with use and replenishes through specific conditions. How you allocate it across your day, your week, your relationships, and your commitments determines the quality of everything you are able to produce and experience in your life. Most people have never sat down and honestly examined where their energy actually goes. They feel chronically tired, perpetually overwhelmed, and consistently unable to show up fully for the things that matter most to them, and they attribute this to being busy or to life simply being hard. But busyness alone does not produce that particular kind of exhaustion. The deepest, most persistent form of energy depletion does not come from working hard toward meaningful goals. It comes from spending significant portions of your daily energy on interactions, obligations, and relationships that drain without replenishing. It comes from giving your most valuable inner resource to people who take it without gratitude, without reciprocity, and often without even realizing they are doing it. Understanding who drains your energy requires honest observation over time. Pay attention to how you feel before, during, and after spending time with specific people in your life. This is not about being suspicious or treating relationships as transactions. It is about being honest about the actual effect different people have on your inner state. Some people, when you think about seeing them, create a subtle feeling of heaviness or dread even before the interaction begins. During the time you spend with them, you find yourself carefully managing what you say, navigating their emotional instability, absorbing their complaints, or shrinking yourself to avoid triggering their reactions. After the interaction, you feel noticeably depleted, anxious, or somehow less than you felt before it happened. This pattern, repeated consistently, is not coincidence. It is information. There are several distinct categories of energy-draining people that are worth understanding individually, because each requires a different response. The first is the chronic complainer. This is the person whose primary mode of engaging with the world is cataloguing everything that is wrong, everything that is unfair, and everyone who has wronged them. They are not looking for solutions. They are looking for an audience, and if you are a caring, empathetic person, you make an excellent audience because you listen, you validate, and you try to help. But no amount of your listening or helping changes anything for the chronic complainer, because the complaining is not about the specific problems they describe. It is a habitual way of relating to the world. You can spend years being the sympathetic ear of a chronic complainer and watch their list of grievances grow rather than shrink, because your attention is actually feeding the pattern rather than resolving it. The compassionate response to a chronic complainer is not to keep absorbing their negativity indefinitely. It is to gently redirect towards solutions or to limit the time you spend in those conversations. The second category is the person who only makes contact when they need something. These relationships operate entirely on a one-directional basis. When this person is facing a difficulty, a crisis, or a need for advice, support, or resources, they reach out and you respond because you are a generous person. But when you are the one facing difficulty, when you need support or simply want connection, the silence is deafening. Over time, this pattern creates a quiet but accumulating resentment that costs you emotional energy, even when you are not actively thinking about it. The unacknowledged inequality in these relationships sits in the background of your awareness consuming psychological resources. Recognizing this pattern clearly is not about becoming cold or transactional. It is about being honest that a relationship which only flows in one direction is not actually a relationship. It is an arrangement, and you are allowed to renegotiate it. The third and most complex category is the person who undermines you, sometimes so subtly that you cannot quite name what they are doing, but you feel its effects clearly. These are people who respond to your good news with a dampening comment disguised as practicality. They are people whose humor consistently targets your insecurities. They are people who position themselves as concerned friends while consistently communicating doubt in your capabilities, your judgment, or your worth. These interactions are particularly draining because the undermining is often coated in enough warmth or humor that confronting it directly feels disproportionate. You walk away from these interactions not quite sure what happened, but feeling somehow smaller, less certain, or less worthy than before. Trust that feeling. It is more reliable than any analysis of the specific words that were spoken. The fourth category is the person who creates perpetual drama. Their life is a continuous sequence of crises, conflicts, and emergencies that require your urgent attention and emotional involvement. When one drama resolves, another appears almost immediately. The details change, but the pattern never does. These people are not necessarily malicious. Many of them are genuinely suffering and genuinely need help. But if you examine the pattern honestly, you will notice that your involvement never actually resolves anything. The drama continues, regardless of how much of your energy you pour into it. Your energy is being consumed without producing any lasting positive outcome for either of you. Caring about someone and allowing them to continuously consume your emotional resources without limit are two different things, and understanding that difference is essential. Now comes the part of this conversation that most people find genuinely difficult. Setting boundaries with energy-draining people is not an act of cruelty or abandonment. It is an act of self-respect and sustainable compassion. You cannot pour from an empty vessel. When you allow your energy to be depleted by people who take without giving back, you are not being generous. You are slowly destroying your capacity to show up for anyone, including the people who genuinely deserve your best presence. The most loving version of you is not the one that gives everything to everyone regardless of the cost. The most loving version of you is the one that maintains enough of their own wholeness to give genuinely, fully, and sustainably to the relationships and responsibilities that truly matter. Boundaries are not walls. They are not rejection. They are honest definitions of what you are and are not available for. They communicate respect for yourself and ultimately for the other person as well, because they create the conditions under which a relationship can actually be healthy and real, rather than one-sided and depleting. A boundary might sound like saying that you are no longer available to talk for 2 hours every evening about problems you have discussed for months without any movement toward resolution. It might sound like declining an invitation to an environment you know, from repeated experience, will cost you significantly more than it gives. It might sound like being genuinely kind, but notably briefer, in interactions with people whose consistent effect on you is negative. People who have never set boundaries often fear that doing so will result in conflict, rejection, or the loss of the relationship. Sometimes that fear is realized. Some people will respond to a boundary with anger or withdrawal because the boundary disrupts a dynamic that was serving them at your expense. When that happens, it is painful, but it is also clarifying. A person who responds to your act of self-respect by punishing you for it has demonstrated precisely why that boundary was necessary. The relationships that survive healthy boundaries become stronger, more honest, and more genuinely nourishing. The ones that cannot survive them were not actually serving your well-being to begin with. Learning to say no without guilt is one of the most profound acts of self-development available to you. Many people, particularly those who were raised to equate their value with their usefulness to others, experience genuine distress when they decline a request or withdraw from a demanding interaction. They feel guilty for protecting themselves. They feel selfish for acknowledging their own limits. But guilt about self-preservation is a learned response, not a moral truth. You were taught, directly or indirectly, that putting others first was virtuous and putting yourself first was selfish. This teaching, while well-intentioned, created a framework in which your own needs became the last legitimate consideration in any interaction. That framework does not serve you, and it does not ultimately serve the people around you either. There is a category of energy drain that comes not from other people, but from the version of yourself you perform for others. Many people spend enormous amounts of energy maintaining a particular image, managing how they are perceived, saying what is expected rather than what is true, and suppressing their genuine responses in order to avoid conflict or maintain approval. This performance is exhausting in a way that goes very deep, because it disconnects you from your own authentic experience. You are spending energy to be someone other than yourself in order to meet other people's expectations, and the cost of that performance compounds daily. The relief that comes from finally being honest, finally saying what you actually think, finally releasing the performance even in one relationship, is disproportionately energizing because you are reclaiming the energy that was going into the act. Your physical environment holds energy too, and it can drain you just as surely as a difficult person can. The places where you spend significant amounts of time either support or undermine your inner state. An environment filled with conflict, negativity, or chaos creates a constant background stress that consumes energy even when nothing specific is actively wrong. If your home environment, your workplace, or the social spaces you frequent are consistently generating tension, noise, or emotional instability, part of your daily energy depletion is happening at the environmental level. Consider this honestly. You may not be able to immediately change every environment you inhabit, but you can make deliberate choices about which ones you minimize, which ones you exit when possible, and how you protect your inner state while you are within them. Replenishing your energy is as important as protecting it. You need to know specifically what restores you, not what you think should restore you based on what works for other people. What actually restores you based on your honest personal experience. For some people, restoration comes through solitude and quiet. For others, it comes through specific kinds of connection with people who genuinely energize rather than drain. For some, it comes through physical movement, creative expression, time in nature, or deep, focused work on something meaningful. Whatever your specific sources of restoration are, treat them as non-negotiable appointments in your life, rather than luxuries you allow yourself when everything else is handled. Everything else will never all be handled. Restoration that waits for perfect timing never happens. The quality of your energy is the quality of your life. Every great thing you are trying to build, every person you love and want to show up fully for, every goal you have committed yourself to pursuing, all of it depends on you having enough inner resource to bring genuine presence and sustained effort to what matters. That resource does not maintain itself automatically. It requires your active protection, your honest boundaries, your deliberate choices about who and what receives access to it, and your consistent investment in the practices that restore it. You are not obligated to be endlessly available to people who consistently leave you diminished. You are not required to sacrifice your own wholeness on the altar of other people's comfort. You are allowed to choose how your energy is spent. You are allowed to protect the resource that makes everything else in your life possible. And when you do that with honesty, with clarity, and with genuine care for both yourself and others, you will discover something remarkable. The people and experiences that remain once you have protected your energy with intention are the ones that actually deserve it. And the life that becomes possible when you show up with your full energy rather than the exhausted remainder is a life that feels, perhaps for the first time, genuinely worth the living. Chapter 8. Develop unbreakable discipline when motivation completely runs out. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings, by their very nature, are temporary. They arrive with intensity, they create momentum, they make the hard thing feel suddenly possible and even exciting, and then they leave. Sometimes they leave gradually, and sometimes they disappear overnight without warning. You wake up one morning, and the fire that was burning so clearly just days ago is gone, and in its place is a flat, grey, uninspired feeling that makes the work feel pointless and the goal feel distant. This is not a crisis. This is not a sign that you chose the wrong path or that you are not cut out for what you are pursuing. This is Tuesday. This is simply what the middle of any meaningful journey feels like when the initial excitement has worn off and the finish line is not yet close enough to generate new excitement on its own. The people who achieve remarkable things over the long term are not the people who found a way to feel motivated every single day. No such method exists, and no such person exists. The people who build extraordinary lives are the ones who learned long ago that motivation is a useful spark, but a terrible engine. They stopped relying on it as the primary fuel for their actions. They built something more durable, more reliable, and more honest in its place. They built discipline. And the difference between a life powered by motivation and a life powered by discipline is the difference between a life that moves only when conditions are favorable and a life that moves regardless of conditions. Discipline is not a personality trait you either have or do not have. This is a critical misunderstanding that causes enormous numbers of people to surrender before they have genuinely begun. When people say they are not a disciplined person, they are describing a habit they have not yet built, not a fundamental characteristic of their nature. Discipline is a skill. It is developed through practice, exactly the way any other skill is developed, through repeated application, through incremental challenge, through the accumulation of small, consistent actions that over time build into an identity. The person who appears effortlessly disciplined from the outside is almost never someone who was born that way. They are someone who practiced that behavior long enough and consistently enough that it became automatic. The mechanics of how discipline actually works in the brain are important to understand because they reveal the specific method through which it is built. Every time you choose to take an action that is aligned with your goals, despite not feeling like it, you are strengthening a neural pathway associated with that behavior. Every time you follow through on a commitment you made to yourself, regardless of your emotional state in the moment, you are depositing into what might be called your self-trust account. That account grows with every kept commitment and shrinks with every broken one. People who have broken promises to themselves repeatedly over years have depleted their self-trust to the point where their own internal commitments feel hollow and unreal. Rebuilding that account starts with extremely small, extremely specific, non-negotiable daily actions that you follow through on without exception. This is why the size of the daily action matters far less than the consistency of it. A person who commits to reading 2 pages every single day, without exception, will build stronger discipline than a person who commits to reading 50 pages and follows through erratically. The brain does not primarily reward the magnitude of the action, it rewards the reliability of it. Every unbroken chain of consecutive days you maintain a behavior strengthens both the neural pathway of that behavior and your belief in yourself as someone who follows through. That self-belief is the psychological foundation of unbreakable discipline, and it cannot be built through grand gestures. It is built through the quiet, unsexy, uncelebrated act of doing what you said you would do on the days when you absolutely do not feel like doing it. The specific moment that discipline is built is not during the easy days. Easy days require no discipline at all. Discipline is forged in the precise moment when you do not want to do something and you do it anyway. That moment of resistance, that split second between the impulse to quit and the choice to continue, is where your character is being written. Every time you push through that moment, you are writing the story that you are someone who does not stop when it gets uncomfortable. Every time you surrender to it, you are writing the opposite story. And both of those stories accumulate over time into the person you become, the habits you have, the results you produce, and ultimately, the life you live. One of the most practical strategies for developing discipline when motivation has completely disappeared is to dramatically reduce the size of the required action. When motivation is high, large, ambitious actions feel natural. When motivation is gone, those same large actions feel overwhelming, and the gap between your current state and the required action becomes a barrier that your depleted psychology refuses to cross. The solution is not to wait until motivation returns. The solution is to make the action so small that it becomes genuinely difficult to justify not doing it. If your goal requires writing, and you cannot find the motivation to write a full chapter, commit to writing 1 paragraph. If your goal requires exercise and getting to the gym feels impossible, commit to putting on your workout clothes and doing 5 minutes of movement in your living room. These reduced actions are not failures. They are intelligent adaptations to the psychological reality of motivation's absence. What you will discover almost every time you lower the barrier and begin the smaller action is that the beginning of the action generates its own momentum. Starting is the hardest part, and once you have started, the resistance to continuing is dramatically lower than the resistance to beginning. Psychologists refer to this as activation energy, the amount of effort required to initiate a behavior. By reducing the size of the action, you are reducing the activation energy required to start it. And once started, the behavior tends to extend naturally beyond its reduced minimum. The paragraph becomes a page, the 5 minutes becomes 30, But even when it does not extend, even when you truly do only the minimum, you have maintained the chain, you have shown up, you have honored your commitment. And that matters more than the output on any single day. Environment design is one of the most powerful and underutilized tools for building discipline. Discipline that depends entirely on willpower is fragile, because willpower is a limited resource that depletes throughout the day. Every decision you make, every temptation you resist, every moment of self-regulation draws from the same finite pool of willpower. By the evening, most people have very little of it left, which is why so many people's discipline collapses in the evenings, regardless of how well they managed it during the day. The alternative to willpower-dependent discipline is environment-dependent discipline. Structuring your physical and social environment so that the desired behavior is the path of least resistance rather than requiring effort to access. If you want to read every morning, put the book on your pillow the night before, so it is the first thing you see when you wake up. If you want to exercise, sleep in your workout clothes so that the friction between waking up and beginning is essentially zero. If you want to eat better, remove the food that undermines your goals from your immediate environment so that accessing it requires deliberate effort rather than mindless reach. If you want to work without distraction, go to a physical location where distraction is unavailable rather than relying on the willpower to ignore it in an environment where it is readily accessible. These are not tricks. They are intelligent applications of how human behavior actually works. Behavior follows the path of least resistance, and you have the power to design your environment so that the path of least resistance leads toward your goals rather than away from them. Identity is the deepest level at which discipline operates, and it is the level most people never reach because they are focused on behavior change rather than identity change. When your goal is to behave differently, you are constantly fighting against your existing sense of who you are. The behavior feels like an imposition, something external you are forcing yourself to do rather than something natural that flows from who you are. But when your identity shifts, when you genuinely begin to see yourself as a disciplined person rather than someone trying to be disciplined, the behavior becomes an expression of who you are rather than a demand placed on who you are. You do not need to motivate yourself to act in accordance with your identity. You simply act because that is what you do. The shift from behavioral goals to identity goals is subtle but transformative. Instead of the goal being to go to the gym 3 times a week, the goal becomes to be the kind of person who takes their physical health seriously. Instead of the goal being to save a certain amount of money each month, the goal becomes to be the kind of person who manages their finances with discipline and intentionality. Instead of the goal being to finish a creative project, the goal becomes to be the kind of person who shows up for their creative work consistently. When you define the identity first, the behaviors that are consistent with that identity follow more naturally because they are no longer in conflict with who you believe yourself to be. They are expressions of it. Building this identity requires evidence, and evidence comes from action. You do not simply decide to believe you are disciplined and immediately feel it. You build the belief through the accumulation of actions that a disciplined person would take. Every day you show up, every small commitment you keep, every moment of resistance you push through adds a piece of evidence to the growing case that you are someone who does what they say they will do. Over weeks and months, that evidence becomes genuinely convincing, not just to the people around you, but to yourself. And a person who genuinely believes they are disciplined acts differently than a person who is trying to become disciplined. The belief changes the behavior, and the behavior reinforces the belief in a cycle that builds on itself until the identity is solid. There will be days when you break the chain. You will miss a day, skip a commitment, surrender to the resistance when you intended to push through. This is not catastrophic, and it is not evidence that you are fundamentally incapable of discipline. It is a human moment in a human process. The response to a broken chain is not guilt, not dramatic recommitment speeches, and not the assumption that the whole effort is now compromised. The response is to return the very next day without drama and continue. The chain can be rebuilt. The practice can resume. What destroys discipline is not a single missed day, but the story you attach to that missed day. If you decide it means you are not a disciplined person, you will act in accordance with that story. If you decide it means you had a hard day, and tomorrow you continue, you will act in accordance with that story instead. The world will consistently offer you reasons to stop. The work will feel harder than you expected. The results will come slower than you hoped. The people around you will not always understand why you are pushing yourself. There will be seasons of your life when discipline feels like carrying an enormous weight up a hill that never seems to end. In those seasons, return to the most basic question available to you. Not whether you feel motivated, not whether it is fair that it is this hard. Simply whether the person you want to become would stop here. If the honest answer is no, you already know what to do. You take the next step. Not because it feels good, not because you can clearly see the summit, but because you decided who you are, and that person does not stop in the middle of the hill just because the hill is steep. Discipline is not the absence of struggle. It is the decision to continue through the struggle without requiring the struggle to first disappear. That decision, made fresh each day, on the hard days and the easy ones, in the seasons of momentum and the seasons of flatness, is the actual substance from which an extraordinary life is constructed. Not talent, not luck, not the perfect circumstances. Just the daily decision to continue when continuing is hard. That is all discipline ever was. And it is available to you right now, today, exactly as you are, without waiting for the motivation to return. Chapter 9. Surround yourself with people who push you forward. There is a principle in human psychology so consistent and so well documented that ignoring it is one of the most expensive mistakes a person can make on their journey toward growth. It is the principle that you become a reflection of the people you spend the most time with, not in a vague philosophical sense, but in a deeply concrete, measurable, neurological sense. Your thinking patterns, your standards, your habits, your beliefs about what is possible, your tolerance for discomfort, your definition of normal. All of these are profoundly shaped by the people whose voices you hear most frequently, whose behaviors you observe most closely, and whose company you inhabit most regularly. You do not simply choose your social circle. Over time, your social circle chooses who you become. This is not a comfortable truth for most people because it carries an implication that feels harsh. It implies that some of the relationships you currently hold may be quietly working against the growth you are reaching for. It implies that the people you love, the people you grew up with, the people you have known for decades, may be holding you at a level that no longer serves the person you are trying to become. Acknowledging this does not make you arrogant or disloyal. It makes you honest. And honesty about the social forces shaping your development is one of the most courageous acts of self-awareness you can practice. Think carefully about the 5 people you spend the most time with right now, not who you wish you spent the most time with, who actually occupies the largest portion of your daily and weekly interactions. Now, ask yourself a series of honest questions about each of them. Are these people pursuing growth in their own lives? Are they building things, developing skills, pushing against their own limits, and taking their potential seriously? When you share a goal or an ambition with them, do they respond with genuine encouragement and constructive challenge, or do they respond with doubt, dismissal, or subtle discouragement? When you are around them, do you feel expanded, inspired, and energized by the possibilities in your life? Or do you feel the quiet pressure to stay the same, to not get too ambitious, to not make others uncomfortable with your desire for more? The answers to those questions are telling you something important about the social environment you are currently growing in, or failing to grow in. Human beings are extraordinarily susceptible to social norms. We are wired, at a deep evolutionary level, to conform to the standards of our group. For most of human history, this instinct was essential for survival. Being cast out from the group was genuinely dangerous, and so the brain developed powerful mechanisms to keep behavior aligned with group expectations. That ancient wiring is still operating inside you today. It is why you unconsciously calibrate your ambitions, your behavior, and even your self-perception to match the unspoken standards of the people around you. If your closest circle considers a certain level of achievement normal, your brain will treat that level as the baseline and will generate resistance when you try to move significantly beyond it. Not because you are incapable of more, but because your social environment is signaling that more is unusual, risky, or threatening to your belonging. This is why the people who make the most dramatic leaps in their personal and professional development are almost always people who, at some point, changed their social environment significantly. They found mentors who operated at a higher level than they did. They joined communities of people who were further along the path they wanted to walk. They sought out relationships with people whose daily standards challenged their existing ones. They did not do this to abandon their past or to consider themselves superior to the people they left behind. They did it because they understood intuitively what research consistently confirms, that proximity to people who are operating at a higher level pulls you upward in ways that motivation, intention, and individual effort alone simply cannot replicate. When you spend consistent time around people who are further along the path you want to walk, several things happen simultaneously that accelerate your development in ways that are difficult to manufacture through any other means. First, your definition of what is normal and what is possible expands. When you regularly see people achieving things you previously considered exceptional, your brain begins to reclassify those achievements as attainable rather than extraordinary. The ceiling you had unconsciously accepted as the limit of what people like you could achieve begins to dissolve. You stop treating certain levels of success as things that happen to other kinds of people and start treating them as legitimate possibilities for your own trajectory. Second, you absorb standards, habits, and ways of thinking through observation and osmosis without even consciously trying to. When the people around you consistently take their health seriously, manage their time with intention, read and invest in their knowledge, handle challenges with composure, and speak about their goals with confidence and clarity, these behaviors begin to feel natural and expected rather than exceptional. You start adopting them not through force of will, but through the basic human mechanism of conforming to group norms, except now the group norms are working for your development rather than against it. Third, high-quality relationships provide honest feedback that is extremely difficult to receive any other way. People who are genuinely invested in your growth will tell you the truth about your blind spots, your patterns, and your limiting behaviors in ways that pure self-reflection cannot always access. You have been inside your own perspective your entire life. You have significant blind spots about yourself precisely because of that proximity. A mentor or a peer who is further along the path and genuinely cares about your development can see things about how you operate that you cannot see from the inside. That kind of honest, loving, direct feedback is one of the most valuable and rare gifts available to a person on a growth journey. The deliberate cultivation of high-quality relationships is a skill, and like all skills, it requires intentional practice. Most people approach their social lives entirely passively. They maintain the relationships that came to them through geography, circumstance, and history, and they rarely ask whether those relationships are the ones that will most serve the person they are working to become. Building the relationships that will genuinely support and accelerate your growth requires a more active and intentional approach. Start by identifying specifically what kind of person you want to learn from and grow alongside. Not a vague ideal, but a specific profile. Someone who has achieved what you are working toward in a particular area. Someone who operates with the level of discipline, creativity, clarity, or character that you are developing in yourself. Someone whose perspective on the challenges you face would be genuinely valuable. Once you have a clear picture of who you are looking for, begin moving toward the environments where those people tend to be found. Professional communities, learning environments, events centered on shared goals, online spaces dedicated to serious growth in specific fields. These are the places where the relationships you need are most likely to be available to you. Do not wait until you feel ready or worthy to engage with people who are operating at a higher level than you currently are. The feeling of readiness rarely arrives before the action that creates it. Reach out with genuine curiosity rather than self-promotion. Ask thoughtful questions. Offer value where you can, even if what you have to offer feels small relative to what the other person has achieved. People who have built something meaningful almost universally remember the period of their own development when they were exactly where you are, and most of them are more willing to engage with genuine curiosity and sincere effort than most people assume. The barrier to accessing mentorship and higher-level relationships is usually not the unwillingness of successful people to engage. It is the reluctance of developing people to ask. Mentorship deserves its own specific attention because it is perhaps the single most accelerating relationship available to a person working to grow. A mentor is not simply someone who has achieved what you want to achieve. A mentor is someone whose journey contains lessons directly applicable to yours, who is willing to share their perspective honestly, and whose investment in your development is genuine rather than transactional. The guidance of a mentor compresses time in a way that is genuinely remarkable. They have already made the mistakes you are about to make, and they can help you navigate around the ones that are avoidable, while helping you extract the maximum learning from the ones that are not. They can see patterns in your approach that would take you years to identify on your own. They can introduce you to resources, perspectives, and connections that would take you a decade of independent searching to find. If you do not currently have a mentor, make finding one a genuine priority rather than a passive wish. Approach potential mentors with specificity about what you are working on and what you are hoping to learn. Demonstrate that you are serious by showing up prepared, following through on every commitment you make, and applying the guidance you receive rather than simply collecting it. The relationship between a mentor and a student functions best when the student brings genuine effort to the exchange. Mentors invest their most valuable resource, their time and attention, in people who demonstrate that the investment will not be wasted. Accountability relationships are another category of high-value connection that most people underutilize. An accountability partner is someone pursuing serious growth in their own life, who has agreed to a mutual commitment of honest reporting, regular check-ins, and genuine challenge when either person is falling short of their stated intentions. The effect of knowing that you will need to honestly account for your actions to someone who genuinely cares about your progress creates a powerful external structure that supports your internal discipline on the days when internal discipline alone is not enough. Choose an accountability partner whose standards you respect and whose own commitment to growth is genuine. A casual arrangement with someone who is not serious will produce casual results. A genuine commitment with someone who takes their own development seriously will raise both of your games. Peer groups, whether formal masterminds, study groups, professional communities, or informal circles of growth-oriented people meeting regularly, create a cumulative effect that individual relationships cannot fully replicate. When multiple people who are all committed to their development come together regularly to share what they are learning, to challenge each other's thinking, to celebrate each other's progress, and to hold each other accountable to their stated intentions, the collective energy of that group generates an upward momentum that pulls every member forward. Being the least developed person in a serious peer group is an enormous privilege. It means you are surrounded by people whose current standard is your next level, and that proximity is one of the most powerful educational experiences available to a human being. It is worth addressing directly the guilt or discomfort that sometimes arises when a person begins deliberately building a higher quality social environment. When you start spending less time with people whose energy, standards, or direction no longer align with your growth, those people may feel the shift, and some of them may react with hurt, confusion, or resentment. That is genuinely painful, especially when the people involved are ones you care about. But consider this perspective carefully. Growing does not require you to look down on anyone. It does not require cruelty, public rejection, or the announcement that you consider yourself better than the people you are spending less time with. It simply requires honest allocation of your most valuable resource, your time and attention, toward the relationships and environments that most support the person you are committed to becoming. The people who truly love you will ultimately respect your growth, even if the transition creates temporary discomfort. And the people whose connection to you was entirely dependent on you staying the same were holding a version of you that you have already outgrown. Releasing that dynamic is not loss. It is the natural and necessary evolution of a person who is taking their potential seriously. You will become who you spend time with. That is not a warning. It is one of the most powerful tools available to you. Use it deliberately. Seek out people who challenge your thinking, who raise your standards, who demonstrate through their daily lives that the things you are reaching for are genuinely achievable. Build those relationships with patience, with genuine curiosity, with the willingness to offer value before you ask for it, and with the understanding that the right people in your life will accelerate your journey in ways that nothing else can fully replicate. The path forward is easier and faster and richer when you do not walk it alone. But the people walking beside you matter enormously. Choose them with the same intentionality you bring to everything else in this book. Because in the end, the quality of your relationships is inseparable from the quality of your life and the quality of the person you are becoming every single day. Chapter 10. Commit every single day to becoming your best self. There is a version of you that exists just beyond the edges of your current comfort zone. Not a fantasy version, not an unrealistic ideal constructed from comparison to other people's highlight reels. A genuine, achievable, deeply personal version of you that is more patient, more focused, more courageous, more honest, more disciplined, and more fully alive than the version showing up today. That version is not waiting for a dramatic event to call them into existence. They are not waiting for the perfect circumstances, the right amount of money, the ideal relationship, or the complete absence of fear and uncertainty. They are waiting for one thing only: a daily commitment from you to close the gap between who you currently are and who you are genuinely capable of becoming. This is what the entire journey of this book has been building toward. Every chapter before this one gave you a specific tool, a specific practice, a specific reframe designed to develop one dimension of the trained mind. You learn to make the foundational decision to invest in your mental development. You learn to identify and dismantle the beliefs that were quietly limiting your potential. You learn to structure your mornings in a way that programs your psychology before the world has a chance to do it for you. You learn to protect the finite resource of your focus from the endless demands competing for it. You learn to extract wisdom from failure rather than running from it. You learn the neuroscience of thought change and the daily practices that make rewiring possible. You learn to guard your energy from the people and patterns that deplete it without return. You learn to build discipline that does not depend on the unreliable fuel of motivation. You learn to deliberately cultivate relationships that pull you upward rather than holding you at your current level. All of that learning, all of those practices, all of that accumulated wisdom converges here in this final chapter into a single organizing principle that makes everything else sustainable and meaningful. That principle is daily commitment, not weekly commitment. Not commitment you renew when you feel inspired, or when results are visible, or when the path feels clear. Daily commitment. The kind that shows up on ordinary Tuesdays when nothing is particularly exciting. The kind that continues on the days when you are tired and the progress feels invisible and the version of yourself you are reaching for feels very far away. The kind that persists through the seasons of your life that are genuinely difficult, when grief or disappointment or exhaustion makes the idea of growth feel almost absurd. That kind of commitment is not built in a single moment of inspiration. It is built in the accumulation of thousands of small daily choices, each one an act of faith that what you are building is worth the building, even when you cannot yet see what it is becoming. The concept of daily commitment is frequently misunderstood as a demand for daily perfection. These two things are not only different, but they are actually in opposition to each other. Perfectionism is one of the most effective disguises that fear has ever worn. It presents itself as high standards while actually functioning as a reason never to begin, never to continue, and never to accept the imperfect but genuine progress that real growth always involves. A person committed to perfection will stop every time they fall short of a flawless performance. A person committed to daily growth will fall short repeatedly. Acknowledge it honestly, learn what is available to learn from it, and return the very next day without requiring yesterday to have been perfect before today can begin. The commitment is not to be perfect. The commitment is to show up and do the work regardless of how yesterday went. One of the deepest truths about becoming your best self is that the destination is not a fixed point you eventually arrive at and then occupy permanently. Your best self is not a static achievement. It is a moving horizon that advances as you advance. Every time you genuinely grow into a new level of who you are, a new level of who you could become becomes visible from that vantage point. This is not a discouraging truth. It is a liberating one. It means the journey does not end. It means there is always more available to you, no matter how much you have already developed. It means that the person you will be in 10 years, if you commit daily to the practices in this book, will be able to see possibilities that the person you are today cannot yet imagine. Growth is not a destination. It is a direction, and daily commitment is how you maintain that direction through every season of your life. The practical architecture of daily commitment begins with a clear and honest answer to one question that you return to at the start of every single day. Who do you need to be today? Not, what do you need to accomplish? Not what external results do you need to produce? Who do you need to be in the hours ahead? What quality of character does today require of you specifically? Perhaps today requires patience in a situation where your instinct is to react with frustration. Perhaps it requires courage in a conversation you have been postponing. Perhaps it requires focus in the face of the distractions that always seem most compelling when the most important work is waiting. Perhaps it requires honesty with yourself about a pattern you have been avoiding, examining, identifying the specific character quality that today demands, and intentionally orienting yourself toward embodying that quality is the most practical form of daily commitment available to you. Write it down every morning, not as a wish but as a declaration. Today, I will be patient. Today, I will be focused. Today, I will be honest about what I have been avoiding. Today, I will be disciplined when the old pattern tells me to stop. This act of written declaration does two things simultaneously. It creates conscious clarity about your intention for the day, which makes it significantly more likely that you will follow through on it. And it creates a record over time of the qualities you have been deliberately practicing, which becomes its own form of evidence that you are the kind of person who takes their growth seriously. Evidence builds identity, and identity drives behavior in the sustainable cycle that genuine transformation requires. Tracking your daily commitment matters more than most people realize until they try it. There is a psychological phenomenon, well documented in behavioral research, showing that people who visibly track their progress are significantly more likely to maintain their behaviors than people who do not. The visual record of consecutive days, of habits maintained, of commitments honored, creates a tangible representation of the identity you are building that your brain finds genuinely motivating to protect. The longer the chain of kept commitments grows, the more psychologically costly it becomes to break it, and that cost becomes a form of protection against the inevitable days when quitting feels easier than continuing. Use a simple journal, a habit tracking app, or even a paper calendar where you mark each day you showed up. Do not underestimate the power of that simple, visible record to support your commitment through the difficult stretches. Evening reflection is the complement to morning intention, and together they form a complete daily practice of conscious self-development. Each evening before you sleep, spend 5 to 10 minutes reviewing the day, not from a place of judgment, but from a place of honest assessment. Ask whether you showed up today as the person you committed to being in the morning, not perfectly, but genuinely. If you did, acknowledge that specifically and let yourself feel the satisfaction of having honored your commitment to yourself. That feeling is not arrogance. It is the legitimate reward of integrity, and it fuels tomorrow's commitment more effectively than any external motivation. If you fell short in a specific way, acknowledge that specifically too, without self-punishment. Identify what the gap between your intention and your action reveals about where your development still needs focused attention. Then, release the day completely. Do not carry the weight of today's imperfections into tomorrow's fresh start. The evening reflection closes the loop on the day so that tomorrow can begin clean. There is a dimension of becoming your best self that goes beyond personal achievement and personal development and touches something much larger. The work you do on yourself does not stay contained within your own life. It radiates outward. The patience you develop in your inner work shows up in how you treat the people who are difficult to be around. The courage you build through facing your own fears creates the capacity to stand beside others when they are facing theirs. The clarity you develop through consistent mindset work makes you a more trustworthy source of perspective for the people in your life who are navigating confusion. The discipline you build through your daily practices makes you a more reliable presence for everyone who depends on you. You are not developing yourself in isolation. You are developing the version of yourself that your relationships, your work, and your community will receive. The investment you make in becoming your best self is simultaneously an investment in the quality of every life you touch. Think about the people in your life who depend on you in some meaningful way. Your children, if you have them, your partner, your closest friends, your colleagues, the people who have not yet come into your life, but who will one day be affected by who you are when they arrive. What version of you do those people deserve to encounter? The default version, running on old patterns, depleted energy, unexamined beliefs, and inconsistent follow-through, or the version you are capable of becoming through the daily application of everything in this book? That question, held honestly and consistently, is one of the most powerful sources of sustainable motivation available to you. Not the motivation of feeling good about yourself in the moment. The deeper motivation of knowing that the work you do on yourself today is a gift to the people whose lives intersect with yours. Progress in the work of becoming your best self is rarely linear, and it is rarely as visible in the short term as you want it to be. There will be weeks that feel like genuine forward movement, followed by weeks that feel like you have gone backward entirely. There will be periods where the practices feel alive and meaningful, and periods where they feel mechanical and hollow. There will be days when you catch yourself responding to life with the exact quality you have been developing and feel the quiet satisfaction of real growth, and days when you react from the old pattern you thought you had already moved beyond and wonder whether any of this is actually working. All of this is normal. All of it is part of the process. The graph of genuine human development does not move smoothly upward. It moves in a jagged, irregular pattern that only reveals its upward direction when viewed across a long enough time horizon. This is why the daily commitment matters more than any single day's performance. You are not trying to have a perfect day. You are trying to maintain a direction across thousands of imperfect days. The direction is what matters. The direction is what compounds. A person who maintains a genuine commitment to becoming their best self across 5 years, even imperfectly, even inconsistently, even with long stretches of feeling like they are not making progress, will look back at the end of those 5 years and be astonished by the distance they have covered. The change will feel gradual from the inside and remarkable when viewed from the outside. But it will only be visible at 5 years if the daily commitment was maintained through all of the days in between when the change was not yet visible at all. There is a conversation you need to have with yourself today, not tomorrow, not after you finish this book, not after circumstances improve, today. It is a conversation about what you actually want from your one life, not what you are supposed to want, not what would be acceptable or safe or reasonable given your current circumstances. What you genuinely, honestly, deeply want to build, to become, to experience, and to contribute during the specific and limited time you have on this earth. That question deserves a serious and courageous answer, because everything about how you use your time, your energy, your focus, and your daily commitment flows from the answer. When you are clear about what you are building and why it genuinely matters to you, the daily commitment stops feeling like a burden you carry and starts feeling like a privilege you exercise. The discipline stops feeling like a constraint and starts feeling like the expression of who you have chosen to be. The difficult days stop feeling like evidence that you are failing and start feeling like the texture of a journey that is genuinely worth taking. Clarity of purpose does not make the work easier. It makes the work meaningful, and meaningful work sustains commitment in ways that willpower and motivation and external reward simply cannot. You started this book in one place. You are ending it in another. Not because reading changes everything, but because the ideas in these pages, applied daily with honesty and patience and genuine commitment, have the power to change everything. The training of your mind is not complete. It is never complete, but it has begun, and the beginning is the most important step, because without it, everything else remains theoretical. Every morning from this day forward, you have a choice. The choice to show up for the person you are becoming, or to surrender to the person you have been by default. That choice will present itself on days when the stakes feel high and on days when nothing particularly significant seems to be happening. On ordinary days, on difficult days, on days when you feel capable of anything and days when you feel capable of almost nothing. And every single time you make that choice in the direction of growth, in the direction of honesty, in the direction of the person you are genuinely capable of becoming, you are winning the only contest that has ever truly mattered. The contest between who you were yesterday and who you are choosing to become today. Win that contest every day. That is how you train your mind. That is how you win in life.